Thanks so much. Today, I am so pleased to welcome Sari Shernofsky to speak on the topic of stories from the narrow bridge, meeting people in their time of need. For 15 years, Sari worked in hospital and hospice settings where she offered compassionate care to those in need. She also served as the Calgary Jewish community chaplain, where in addition to visiting individuals, she helped set up support groups and lots of training workshops for synagogues and the general community that wanted to become involved in community care. For Sari to care for others in their time of need, whether it be illness, end of life care, or simply to connect with those who are isolated or alone, is not a choice, but an obligation she sees as a profoundly Jewish value. Sari now lives in Victoria and is an active member of Kolat Mayim, so we're so pleased to have her join us. And she has also already begun to offer Bikur Cholim, or visiting the sick programs to those in need here in Victoria. So please join me in welcoming Sari Shernofsky.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much for your interest in joining me here. I know there's some familiar names from as far away as my cousin in Florida. I'm happy she's joining us here too. And before I begin, there's a little song I'd like to share with you. It's called Gesher Tsar Ma'od, and it really speaks to me in a number of ways. So Sam, if you could play the song now, and then we could begin my presentation after the song.
כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד, כל העולם כולו גשר צר מאוד, גשר צר מאוד. The entire world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. The entire world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. And the
Thank you.
Sam, if you could remove me from the spotlight, I would appreciate that.
Yes, a narrow bridge. Kol Halam is just, the world is just a narrow bridge, and the thing is not to be afraid. Those are the words of Rev Nachman of Breslov. He was born and lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s. He was one of the greatest Hasidic masters, and in fact, he was the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidism. And I love this song because of so many ways you can interpret it. You know, all life is a narrow bridge. And what exactly does that mean? Are we the bridge? Are we on the bridge? Are we in the bridge? But maybe we are the bridge. And I see us as being the bridge, and we're reaching out our hands to others. And we all do that. And that's basically what a chaplain does, is reach out their hands to others. And there is a chaplain in each of us to be able to reach out our hands to others and help make Tikkun Olam happen. So one of the things I'd like to talk about today is all the questions people have asked me over the years. I was 15 years both a multi-faith chaplain in the hospital system in Calgary, as well as the Jewish community chaplain. And over the years, I've received a number of questions. So one is like, okay, what's a chaplain? And how did you get into this work? And what exactly do you do? And what kind of training do you need to be a chaplain? And finally, the big question everybody asks is, oh, don't you get depressed? Yeah, the short answer is no, I don't get depressed, never get depressed. It's a pretty joyful thing for me. So I'll go through and answer those questions as well. At the end, I'll talk about spirituality and aging and what the spiritual needs are of older people, and as well a little bit about MAID, medical assistance in dying. I've had a bit of experience with that, and it's changing and evolving over time. So, you know, we can have that discussion and respond to questions if anybody's interested in that. So, what is a chaplain? Well, a chaplain provides spiritual and emotional support, most usually to people in an institutional setting. So, for example, there are chaplains in prisons, there's chaplains in the army, and there's chaplains in healthcare. The chaplains in the other institutions, such as prisons and armies, are not trained to be chaplains. They're generally members of the clergy, and who choose their life path to offer their support to those people in those institutions. Healthcare chaplains are a little bit different because they're trained to be multi-faith chaplains, and it's a 2-year training program based in the hospital, as well as academics. So chaplain is a kind of it's a Christian word, and it derives from chapel. The world is changing and evolving, and that word has been evolving as well. So there is a Canadian Association of Chaplains that's changed its name to Spiritual Care Providers, and that's the current term that people use, although I'm not sure people understand it any better than chaplain. And many people have never heard of a Jewish chaplain. And I found that in my early visits to people, they were really surprised. Oh my gosh, a Jewish chaplain, what's that? So that was a new thing for a lot of people. How did I get into this work? Well, often people go into chaplaincy work a little bit later in life. And that's very common because you need to have some life experience behind you to be able to be effective and to be able to be compassionate and empathetic. And so, was it a midlife crisis? Maybe a little bit of a midlife crisis for me. I found that I had had a wonderful career where I was working as a journalist and then in the corporate world and as a consultant for a number of years. The work that I did was very intellectually challenging, and I appreciated and loved it. But at some point, I began to consider that I wanted to do some work with my heart and not my head. I looked forward and I wanted to be able to look back at the end of my life and think, okay, I've done something that actually helped somebody else that was meaningful. And, I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. But when I saw that there was a training program for multi-faith hospital chaplains, I said, that's going to be my path. I will do that. I did not have it in my head that I was going to be a Jewish chaplain. I was just going to be a chaplain. And so I started to pursue that when I was able to let go my work and take the training. I had journeyed with a friend whose husband was dying from cancer when he was about 50 years old, and we would walk every night, and I would listen to her and through the process. And I found at the end of those evening walks that I was very energized, that I really, it meant something to me. And joy is kind of a weird word, but it felt very powerful to me to be there, to be helpful and to listen to the best of my ability to what she was going through. So that was kind of where it began to kind of emerge for me as a chaplain might be a wonderful thing to do. And so I also had a little bit of a fear of dying. My mother passed away when I was about 62, and it sort of prompted me to question what death and dying was all about. And I started looking for books to read on the topic. All the books that I found kept saying people aren't afraid of the actual dying, they're afraid of the pain. Well, no, that wasn't the case with me. I wasn't afraid of the pain. I was afraid of the loss of ego, what was going to happen at the end, how I couldn't imagine, moving into, I don't know what, into nothingness, or maybe not. We don't know what's on the other side. And so there was a little bit of fear and worry. And I think I was thinking that if I got closer and spent more time with people who were towards the end of their life, I would get more comfortable with the concept of my own dying. And yes, it worked. And I am now as comfortable, I think, as you can get with the idea of my own dying. So those were the kinds of things that were driving me. And so it was, it was an opportunity for me to move into that world. So the chaplaincy training program, like, what do you have to do to be a chaplain? It's a 2-year hospital-based training program. Half the time you're on the units with patients, you're participating in rounds, you're a team member, you have access to the charts, you can write notes in the charts, you can participate in meetings and the rounds with all the medical team, and you're just part of the medical team in the hospital. You get to do the work and debrief with your cohort group. And then there's the opportunity also for didactic learning on various topics. And it's also the training program is a very reflective program. So you are always spending time reflecting, writing all kinds of essays on your feelings about things and how you view things. And it was actually a very, very good training program. Some members of the clergy are required to take 1 unit of clinical pastoral education, which is what it's called. It requires 4 units to be accredited to be a chaplain. And some, members of the clergy become chaplains without those pastoral care training programs, but many, like Reformed Temple, and there's some Christian denominations that require 1 unit of CPE, pastoral care training, to become, a minister or a rabbi. And it's really a worthwhile process. So I went through that process, but I had to also get, you were required to have a master's degree in your own studies. And in this case, this was Jewish studies for me, which I did online at a college in the United States, Gratz College near Philadelphia. And so I went through that program. It was not an easy program. I was the first non-Christian to kind of challenge it. And it was round pegs and square holes, square pegs and round holes. It was a bit difficult to get through the process and the requirements. I had to sit out a year of my training to take the courses. And during that time, I said, okay, well, while I'm sitting out the year, I'll go and visit Jewish patients in the hospital, which I did. And so I visited Jewish patients who were so grateful, so appreciative of my visit. I was so surprised, actually, at how grateful they were, and what a reward it was to just do this small thing for them. I found especially ultra-Orthodox women were really happy to see me, because they felt really uncomfortable with a male rabbi when they were in, physical distress. And so that was also very nice to know. And so I began visiting Jewish patients, and after a point I thought, oh, well, I should probably tell somebody that I'm doing this. And so I met with the executive director of the Jewish Federation in Calgary, and we had a nice discussion, and he was very happy that I was doing this. And I continued to report to him for a little while. And we decided that we would call me the Jewish community chaplain. And then at some point he said, well, is there anything else I could do for you? And I said, well, you could pay me. And so he go, oh, okay. He wasn't sure. He thought maybe I was being paid through the hospital system, which didn't happen. And so, and it wasn't about the money. It was about the acknowledgement and respect for the profession. So that was how I became the Jewish community chaplain, sort of on my own initiative. So what else do we have here? So what I do, what did I do? I visit people and let them take me into their world, and spend time with them. I'm going to tell you some stories. So that's probably the easiest way to describe my experiences. And one of my early stories took place when I was a student. And as a student, we were on call at that time. And that meant we carried a pager, and we would respond after hours if there was a spiritual need in the hospital. And so I got a page at midnight. There was a family who wanted a Bible, and the nurse who called to request the Bible said she didn't have a Bible. I said, no problem, I'll come in and I'll go to the office and I'll bring a Bible to the family. So I drive into the hospital, and of course it's dark and there's nobody in the parking lot and it's empty. And I walk into the room first, just to make sure that I'm on the right track, and to meet the people and to tell them, okay, I'm going to go down and get a Bible for you. The family was an older man who was not conscious anymore, but he was comfortable and at peace. sitting beside him was his older wife, and a daughter was there, and a friend of the daughter, and a grandson. And the daughter was very anxious to get a prayer book, to get some scriptures. She wanted to read scriptures to her father. She was quite evangelical and wanted to do something, but she didn't quite know what that was. So I said, and I'm thinking, oh dear, maybe I'm not the right chaplain for this situation, right? She's evangelical. I'm not sure what I can do to facilitate her belief system. And anyway, so I go running downstairs. It's a bit of a walk. It's in another building, so I go get the Bible, and it's a New Testament, and I come back up and I hand her the Bible, and she starts looking for different scriptures to be able to read out loud to her dad. And anyway, so she's not satisfied with doing that. It's not working for her. And I'm sitting there, and in between, I'm sort of talking with family and asking questions and learning a little bit about dad and mom, and from mom and from the daughter. And but then the daughter says, well, maybe we can sing some hymns. Do you have a hymn book? Oh yeah, I have a hymn book. I could go get a hymn book. So it's good to have something to do anyway. Didn't feel like I was doing very much. So I went downstairs, and I'm thinking, oh, a hymn book. Maybe I can sing some hymns, because when you're growing up in Montreal in the Protestant school board, when I did, you learn all the hymns. So I go get the hymn book, and I'm seeing, not the hymns that I grew up with. Nobody sings Onward Christian Soldiers anymore. That's not a thing. And so I'm coming back with the hymn book with the songs I don't know at all. And I'm feeling, oh my God, am I the right chaplain here again? Anyway, so I hand over the hymn book to the daughter, and she starts to browse through it and starts a few hymns here and there, but it's not doing anything for her either. And so we sit and, we chat a little bit and talk. And then at one point in the quiet, I get up and I walk towards the head of the bed, and I put my hand on the forehead of the man, and I start to talk with him gently and tell him what a special life he'd led and how loved he was. He'd been in the war, and I talked about that, and I talked about the family being around and how much love was surrounding him. And as I was talking gently to him, the daughter and her friend started humming in the background. La 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 dum 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 la 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 was blind, but now I see. Sorry for my voice, which isn't the best, but I had a backup group. I was doing my thing at the head of the bed with dad, and I had this backup group singing with me. And it was the most magical moment. It was just a holy, sacred moment. And when it was over, the daughter had a wonderful smile on her face. She was so grateful. I got a big hug. We gave her a moment. We gave her the moment that she needed, but she didn't really know what it was. And I walked out of the room at 2:00 in the morning, and I was higher than a kite, walking through the dark hospital and the parking lot. Oh my gosh, it was so special and such an honor and a privilege to be allowed into that space and into that time with that family and help create this absolutely wonderful experience. So that was a really, really special moment. And maybe I wasn't the wrong chaplain for this situation after all. So, not depressing. You're giving of yourself. It's tikkun olam, okay? One person at a time. So there were wonderful, deep, holy, spiritual moments with people. There were also significant learning moments. I had one situation where a 65-year-old Jewish man came into the hospital ICU. He had had a multi-organ failure. His kidneys were gone and his intestines were about to burst. He was in heart failure, so he was intubated and on life support. And his family came to join him. There was a wife and two adult children in ICU. And of course, they were in shock. He was 65, and it was just happened all of a sudden, just like that. And they were in terrible shock. And in the meantime, the medical team, as the days progressed, were thinking, well, we've got to take this guy off life support. Really, he's gone. He's been gone for a while. But at one point, the ultra Orthodox rabbi came to visit, and he said, no, you can't take him off life support. Nope. So the family said, okay, nope, we're not doing that. And so we I spent time every day with the family. The fellow did eventually pass away in about a month. I don't want to say naturally, because it wasn't natural, but without any intervention. And I began to realize something, that during that month, the family had some time to get over the first initial shock and get used to the idea. It also allowed them time to make an application and receive some insurance, critical care insurance, which they really needed and appreciated. And it was a time for that. And maybe most importantly, they didn't have the need to make a decision to pull the plug. And I don't know how families do that and how awful it must be, because there's got to be a place at the back of your head that says, what if I hadn't? There's got to be that question. So I was grateful, and it was a real learning experience for me about timing and being with the family every day for that month and spending time with them and supporting them. And we became very bonded, and I did spend the rest of my time as chaplaincy with Mom. Mom passed away just before I came out west to Victoria. So it was like a full circle in a way. But yeah, it was a real learning moment for me. Another learning moment was a woman, 50-year-old woman, who had been in the hospital for 8 of 10 years, basically. And I had met her first in ICU. She spent the last 6 years of her life, basically, in a hospital, on a hospital bed, 100% of the time. And she was the most beautiful soul, and she was loving and wonderful. She had hope. She couldn't leave the hospital because she had lupus, but there were multiple complications. Her kidneys were infected, and they weren't able to do anything about that as much as they've tried. And they had all kinds of different ways they were looking at it and hoping to do. Anyway, none of them really worked. So this woman, who I met when she was 50 and she turned 60 in the hospital, we celebrated what we could celebrate. I brought things for Passover, and we had a little Passover Seder with grape juice and some matzah and some horseradish. And she still had a smile. She still had warmth for everybody. She was loved by the staff. And I learned how when you have so little, you can still make a difference in the world. And she was able to make a difference for all the people who worked on her unit and for me, because she had love and because she had hope. Her world had dwindled to almost nothing. She was fortunate. Her husband retired during that time period, so he was able to come on a daily basis with their little dog. But she managed to create a little bit of a life for herself, and she taught me an awful lot. But things started to deteriorate, and she began to have incidents, maybe on a weekly basis. Things were not going well. And I got a call from her husband saying, looks like she's on her way out. And this was right before the lockdown for COVID. I remember it was April 1st. And so I went running down to the hospital and chatted with the husband outside the front door of her room. And when the nurse left, I went back in and I talked with her and I prayed with her. Spent maybe 10 minutes. She was on her way. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing anything out. Maybe they were seeing something inside. I wished her well and prayed with her. And I left the room. And the nurse went back in and came back out right again and told us that she had just passed away. So it kind of felt like she was waiting for me, waiting for some words, waiting for some prayers. I'm not sure, but I was so happy to have been there at that time with her, to be able to see her out, to cross the narrow bridge into whatever happens next. So that was a really special time, and I learned a lot too. So one more story. And this is about an Israeli couple who came to the Rockies in Banff on holidays, and they were having a hiking holiday. And the man, Moti, let's call him Moti came into the hospital, and he had developed Guillain-Barré disease, which is a disease of paralysis. It's quite serious. Some people make a full recovery, some people make a partial recovery, and it's a very extended recovery time. So he wasn't able to leave us for a few months. So he was in the hospital with his wife, who visited every day. They didn't know anybody in Calgary at all. So I connected them with the Jewish community. There was a man in the community who had Guillain-Barré disease. So I contacted him, and he came up and visited with the two of them and shared his experiences and his compassion. And that was really special. And then I was thinking, what else can I do for this couple? And I realized, well, maybe it would be nice for him to meet an Israeli. And I had a good friend whose son's girlfriend was Israeli. So I called her and I said, hey, there's this patient in the hospital. He's really sick. He's Israeli and his wife is there. They don't know anybody. Would you want to go up and check it out? So she went up and spent numerous times visiting the two of them, and they had some lovely visits. And eventually they were finally able to fly home on the airplane. And we said goodbye, and we stayed in touch for a while after that, and quite a while after that, by email. And they were very grateful for the support that I had provided. And one of the most astonishing things about this little story is that not long after that, the girlfriend, the Israeli girlfriend's mother in Israel got sick. And so she flew over there, and the medical team couldn't figure out what was going on. They couldn't figure out what was wrong at all, but the daughter knew it was Guillain-Barré disease. So she ended up participating in diagnosing her mother, and would not have happened if, there hadn't have been that intervention. So that was kind of a special experience. So those are a couple of kind of special stories. I have one more related to music, because music can be very, very powerful for people towards the end of life. It can be really powerful for dementia. Often when people with dementia are played music from their earliest years, they can respond and sometimes even come back to, cognitive alertness for a little while anyways. So music can be really quite special. So I was visiting a younger, 50-ish younger woman in the hospital. She was one of 4 sisters, and her mom was there, 2 of her sisters was there, dad was there, and one of her sisters had already passed away. And here was mom losing her second of 4 daughters. And I couldn't imagine how awful that must have been for everybody. She was a lovely, gentle woman. She was quite weak, but she was alert in her bed. And we had a lovely visit. And with my not so great voice, I started singing with her. Oh, say shalom bimromav, Uya say shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'maru, amen. So I'm singing, oh, say shalom, let peace fall. And the family, who'd kind of been milling about, not quite knowing what to do with themselves, packing things and straightening out things. Anyway, everybody started singing along with me. And the patient was singing. And it was very, very, very sweet. And it was meaningful for the patient, and it gave the family something to do that was meaningful also. And I left them singing. And it was, again, very, very, very special that this was how they were going to serenade her out. And I'm glad I was there. Glad I was there to help facilitate that. So music, very powerful, very healing, just a wonderful thing. So those are some stories of my journeys as a chaplain. So not depressing at all for me. If you can make a difference, feel like you've made a difference, then there's joy, there's satisfaction, there's contentment, and there's meaning for me, meaning for them. So the last half of my presentation, I want to talk a bit about spirituality and aging, and then maybe about some aspects of MAID. So as we get older, spirituality is something that becomes more important. But what is spirituality? What is it? So spirituality for some is the presence of a divine essence. For others, it might be a more secular concept involving your inner life and your personal belief systems. But generally, spirituality refers to kind of the deepest values and meaning that you take from life. Everybody's got some spirituality, something that gives their life deeper meaning and purpose. Could be nature, could be God, That could be a lot of things, but we all have some spiritual aspect where there is something that drives us that's a little bit beyond us, beyond our own immediate needs. And so spirituality was something that is now being separated from religion, but up until a couple of decades ago, spirituality and religion, went hand to hand. But now they're separated. So you can be spiritual without being religious, and vice versa. So, and you can be both. And a lot of it is about, I guess, also finding meaning and purpose in life. So if you go back to some of the psychologists, post-war psychologists, in the 50s and 60s, meaning of life was very important at that time, especially for people like Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, a psychologist who created his own psychological theory called logotherapy. And so Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And one of his most quoted comments was, after his experience of Auschwitz, was that you might not be able to change the world around you, control the situation around you, but the only thing you can actually have control over is your attitude, that you can change and that you can have control over. Then you've got the Ericksons, Erik Erikson, who talked about the stages of life, and even Carl Jung, who also focused on the second half of life and the importance of a life review. And the second half of life is according to Jung, much more important than the first half. And that life review is critical. I had an experience also with a cardiac ICU patient, an older woman, who was feeling despair because she felt she hadn't done anything meaningful, achieved anything in her life. So I started to ask her some questions about her life, and it turned out she was a war bride. So she came over to Calgary, which must have at the time been a real pioneer town, must have been a real shock to her. From England, she came from England, and so she started, created a whole life for herself, created a family, made a family. And as she talked about her experiences, she began to see that she did achieve something, and she became much more satisfied, and she released her despair, and she found some peace and found some contentment. So that life review is an important aspect of what the needs are for older people when they're going through their spiritual needs as they get older. In my hospice work, I worked as a multi-faith chaplain in hospice, 14-bed hospice for 10 years. And there were a number of things that I found would happen for those people. So I'll just share that with you in case you have older people in your life or you see yourself in some of these issues. But there are 13 aspects, spiritual needs for older people. One of them is support for dealing with loss. As we get older, the losses pile up. Your colleagues, your cohort starts to die, but you also have loss of your family, your parents, you have loss of your abilities, your eyes, your legs, whatever you've got, your arthritis, your cancer. There's a lot of loss, and it just continues to accumulate as we get older. So we all need support in that journey, in that loss journey, to come to acceptance and be able to move forward. To transcend circumstances, we need to be able to transcend that. My friend in the hospital for 6 years was able to transcend her circumstances and look beyond it and find meaning in her life. And she did that so beautifully, and I honor that and feel really special that I was able to share that with her. Meaning and purpose in life, right? Retrospectively, sometimes it happens, like this cardiac patient. But definitely you need meaning and purpose to go forward. A lot of people, meaning and purpose is tied up with their work. Once you're not working anymore, it's very hard to find meaning and purpose. So that becomes a challenge, and often involves lots of discussions. Hope, to find some hope, and hope might look different as you get older. So hope might not be for a recovery. Hope might be for seeing a sunrise or a sunset the next day. So hope changes quite a bit as we get older and as we move into a place where we're releasing a lot of our life. To love and to receive care. So one of the biggest issues in hospice for patients is receiving care. Many people are proud of their self-sufficiency, and it's terribly hard for them to accept that people are there to help them do things that they would normally be doing on their own. I remember reading Tuesdays with Maury many years ago, and Mitch asked Maury, how do you allow, someone to take you to the bathroom and toilet you without losing your dignity? Like, how do you just do that? And I don't remember the exact words of Maury, but it was something about the fact of allowing people to give to you, to be a recipient of their giving, of their love. And if we're going to be giving, there's somebody on the other side that has to be receiving. And so it's a mitzvah, isn't it, to be able to receive what somebody's giving you. So I talked about that with patients an awful lot, about allowing loving caregivers, and in hospice, the caregivers are all very, very loving and form deep bonds with their patients. And it's okay. It's okay to let someone help you and allow them to do that, and graciously allow them to do that. And it's part of what we have to learn as we get older. We need unconditional love too. And sometimes it's only God that can provide that for us, but it's an important aspect of our life, and especially as we get older. We need to be thankful. As much as we have losses, we need to be grateful and thankful for what we have had and what we still have. And we know that there's always going to be people in a worse off situation to us. And focusing on the gratitude is a much more spiritually healthy way to go through life, later life anyways. We need validation and support as we get older for our religious beliefs and behaviors. Some of us come back to religion that maybe we had ignored for many years. And it's there waiting for us to explore and learn again at another level. Personal dignity, really important for people towards the end, to have dignity, to be, and dignity is very, very personal. Each person would define dignity individually. So it means different things to different people. There's actually some research being done on dignity by a psychiatrist in Winnipeg by the name of Harvey Chachanov. And Harvey has gone across the country with his dignity research and training program to help caregivers be able to treat their patients with more dignity and find out what that dignity means for them. So, and also, people need to be able to express their anger and their doubt. So all of those ways of expression, sitting with an older person and allowing them to talk out these things and to ask questions to help release some of these things is about healing the world, one soul at a time. Tikkun olam. And for help them not to be afraid also, not to be afraid. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about MAID, medical assistance in dying. Generally, the reasons that people choose MAID, which has been really popular over the last few years, growing popularity in Canada. People choose MAID because they're afraid of suffering. They don't want to be helpless. And that's that whole issue of not wanting people to help them. They don't want to be helpless, and they don't want to be a burden to others. So, and maybe some of those reasons are a bit misguided, but those are the reasons generally people choose. I had one situation in hospice where a young mom, we had a couple of teenagers, came into hospice and requested MAID, but she was perfectly, she was not ill yet. She was going out for lunch with her friends and shopping, and she was out of the hospice more than she was in. And I finally sat down with her and I said, I just asked, why MAID? And she said, well, I'm going to die in 3 months, because she was told that was what hospice requirement was, that the expectation was that you had about 3 months or less to go. So she took that to mean she was going to go in 3 months. And she didn't want to be a burden on her family. Never mind what her family wanted. And the fact is that her family would grieve regardless of when and how she chose or didn't choose to go. You can't stop your family from grieving your loss, and nor should you try. But when I told this young woman that there had been another patient in the hospice who, with the same condition, who had been with us for a year, she went, okay, then, all right, I will, I'm going to change my mind. All right, maybe I have more than 3 months. So she did. She changed her mind, and she took herself off the MAID list, and she continued to, live her happy life, going out and enjoying her life for friends. And she did pass away a few weeks later, actually, from an incident. So it happened quickly and right away. And but it was the way it maybe should have been. So what happens with MAID often is poor information. People are told MAID is available, but they're not told what other supports are available and what they might look like. And especially over COVID, when people weren't taking allowed to take hospice tours or learn more about hospice. The doctors are the ones that basically, we've heard stories in the media about people offering, okay, well, if you're not happy, you can always have MAID. I'm not sure what the doctors say, but there isn't a big conversation about all the other options like palliative home care, which in Alberta is very, very good, and hospice. There are 7 hospices in Calgary, and they're all very, very good, and very loving, warm, and caring places to spend your final days. And there's, some good reasons not to be at home. My friend whose husband passed away didn't want to go into hospice, and so he spent his final days at home, and I'm not sure whether it was really a nightmare or not for the family after he was gone. And I just know that the mom really, pretty much threw everything out in the house and renovated the house. And when you've been subject to your husband as a skeleton sitting on the couch bleeding from every place you could bleed from for days and weeks, not sure those are memories that you want to keep in your home. So there's some good things about hospice, lots of good things about hospice. People just aren't educated about them, which is a shame. The medical staff are at hospice, when there is a MAID at hospice, are also really frustrated. They feel that their caring and their love isn't enough, and the procedures aren't being followed, and they weren't. There was pressure, believe it or not, pressure by a family member for a loved one to have MAID, because the daughter thought dad was dying when we knew he wasn't, but we couldn't stop the process. There was a lot of pain and suffering by families whose loved one had committed MAID. And they found it abrupt and, kind of very disjointed, not natural, not really that peaceful. MAID team comes in, nobody's allowed to be in the room, not the rest of the medical staff, and not the rest of the the family comes in and out. The medical procedures there's 3 medical procedures that take time, and it's not the easiest experience for family, and maybe it should have been done a little differently. I know in Oregon, they've had death with dignity, whatever you want to call it. It's not medical assistance in dying. They have another name for it, but what they do is they give the medication to the patient directly. It puts it in their medicine cabinet and then can take it if and when they want it. And about 1/3 of the time they don't take it. It's just there as insurance in case. And I can appreciate that. It's yeah. So, if you need it, it's there, and it's insurance, and it can give you confidence and peace of mind, but it doesn't necessarily have to be used. And in most cases, palliative care and hospice can help with suffering and help with the pain and help manage it much, much better than the hospitals do. They really have a whole arsenal, and that's what they do. So they're really the experts at it. So if you can be pain-free, maybe there's less of a need to want to end it. I know the research shows when people are suffering and pain, they do want to die, but when their pain is relieved, they want to live. So, things should maybe change a little bit. And now we're seeing, of course, in the mental health community, the government's pondering whether there should be made available for people with chronic mental health issues. And I have some sympathy for that myself, because about 10 years ago in the Calgary Jewish community, there were about a half a dozen people in their 60s and 70s who were actually committed suicide. And so you're 70 years old, you don't have any hope. And so I can see that, you've lived your whole life with chronic mental health. So the hope is lost, and maybe it's time, not to be suffering anymore. Anyway, this is what we're all talking about now. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. So I'm open for questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sari. That was so moving, and you've really embodied our theme of this series of talks, answering the call to heal the world, and the power of Hineni and listening to that call. It's very, very inspiring. And you also I feel like I've just sat down to have coffee with you in a sense, and you've really been so warm and open and engaging in your presentation. Very, very grateful for that. So I just wanted to let everyone know that we are open to question and answer at this point. And if